This show is brought to you by Go Live TV. Download the app now.
Hi, welcome again to Immigration Law and Reality, and my name, as always, is Richard Borax. Now, we've talked about language testing, language exams with immigration before. We've mentioned it before, but I want to go back to the subject of the English language exam because something happened the last few days, and I think it's worth sharing. I met a friend of mine from Brampton, a recent immigrant from India, a very successful man now in Brampton, very successful. And when he came to the office, I showed him the chart that I've had here before, and it was the chart again, just to refresh everybody's memory. This is the chart that indicates how many landed immigrants came to Ontario as workers, as skilled workers in 2018. And again, India was half, 30,000 out of 60,000. And again, Portugal is 55, and the Azores and Madeira, Mozambique, Angola, 0. So I gave this to my friend, Indian friend from Brampton. I asked him, what did he think about this? And he looked at it, and he said, this is confusing. He said, don't Portuguese and Italians and Europeans, don't they apply? And I said, well, yeah, they apply. Well, what happens? I said, well, they lose, most of them. Look at the numbers. Numbers don't lie. Then I asked him, is immigration a problem in Brampton? And he said, well, of course not. Immigration is not a problem in Brampton. I said, why not? And he said, well, because people apply and they get visas. They get whatever they apply for. It's you apply, you get the visa. They expect to win. And I told him, well, you Europeans expect to lose. And he thought I was crazy, but he looked at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. And so he said, well, do they make proper applications? I said, well, yeah. I said, so what's the problem? I said, they can't pass the IELTS English exam. He says, well, then if you can't pass it, buy it. I said, buy it? And I've heard stories before. We've all heard stories. You go on the internet, you Google IELTS corruption, and we've all heard these stories. But for me, this was even at my old age, this was a shocker to be told that in Brampton, they simply arranged the IELTS exam by buying a result. So I thought it's worth talking about that today because a lot of people in the European communities are convinced that there is corruption in immigration, and they're convinced that's why there's this imbalance in immigration. And that's just not me speaking. Those are opinion polls along those lines. So let's talk about the language exam again and how it works. First of all, where do IELTS, and there's the other minor English exam called CELPIP, C-E-L-P-I-P, where do they get their power from? Well, they get their power because there's a law in Canada that gives these two organizations exclusivity over testing English for immigration purposes. This is a law. And at the time the government passed that law, it made sense. Why? Because when that law was made, IELTS, and if you want to put that other graphic on so people can see what we're talking about, there it is. IELTS at the time when the law was, when they got the monopoly with this other organization, they were not a profit-making organization. Both IELTS and CELPIP were controlled by non-profit people. IELTS was controlled by the British Council, by the University of Cambridge, and by a collection of universities in Australia. CELPIP was controlled by the University of British Columbia. So the government thought, and rightfully so, that you can trust these people not to be corrupt because they were not a profit-making organization. So what happened? Well, the world changed in about 2016 when IELTS sold for $300 million, sold the Asian, that means India and China and Southeast Asia, Bangladesh and the Arab states, and they also, I believe, threw in Brazil and Mexico. And for $300 million, this Australian company took over the use of the name IELTS. Now, from what I've been able to gather, the British Council is no longer involved. And let's face it, the British Council has a tremendous reputation for integrity and service, well earned and well deserved. But for the life of me, I don't know how the British Council can allow its name, its association with IELTS Asia, Brazil, and Mexico to pollute its good reputation. Now, so IELTS, on the graphic there, see it says IELTS British Council Canada. And true enough, the British Council controls IELTS in Europe and North America, and they're tough. There's no monkeying around with their examinations procedures, their security. And I don't think anybody's ever said that there was monkeying around with the numbers, the results. And the exams are tough. They make it practically impossible for a tradesperson from Europe or Brazil, those Latin countries essentially, to pass. But at least it's basically run honestly in Europe and North America. But when it comes to Asia, especially India, IELTS is not that honest. It's a private business. It's run as a private business. Not only does it run English exams, but it's in the recruitment business, which is direct conflict because it hustles people as well as hustling the English language exams. So, and that's why my friend in Brampton said, you need an IELTS result, pay for it. And that's been a dirty little secret now for a while, but as long as that is there, we're going to see numbers like we've seen before, that 50% of the successful applicants come from India, because if they can't pass, they just buy. Now, the question now is, what's the solution to this? Because it's one thing to complain, it's another thing to provide solutions. And the solutions here are quite simple. First, we have to scrap the law that gives monopoly to two organizations internationally. I understand that there has to be some standards for testing language overseas, but we should not be giving that power to commercial monopolies that no longer have a non-profit designation. That's first. Get rid of IELTS's and CPIP's monopoly situation. CPIP, by the way, used to be associated with the University of British Columbia, non-profit, and now, just like IELTS, it's a money-making cash register. And that simply will not do. So the first thing we have to do is get rid of their monopoly. The second thing, and this is for me most interesting and for most of my clients most interesting, how to deal with the language testing of undocumented workers here in Ontario. Remember, 500,000 souls are undocumented here. A lot of them, not all of them, but many of them would like to become immigrants here. And what do we do with language testing? Now, the Undocumented Workers Committee and other observers have said very simply to government, Ontario already has language laws, and Canada already has very good language testing centers in Ontario. Our Canadian government language testing centers in Ontario are much better and much cheaper than IELTS and CPIP. I have no idea why we're allowing these foreigners in IELTS, these out-of-control foreigners in IELTS, to grow and make a lot of money on language testing in Ontario when we already have Canadian government testing centers in Ontario that are much better and much more professional and much more experienced than these foreigners in IELTS and the foreigners from British Columbia in CELPIP. Now, so in Ontario with the undocumented workers, it seems monkey work. We already have the testing centers here. They're well run, totally professional, no corruption, experienced. They're there. They could test the undocumented workers. Now the next question is, which standard? You see, IELTS and CELPIP, they will not make a special language exam for trades workers. Oh, they say they have different level 4, level 5. The exam's the same, where you put your little comma, and you got to be a bricklayer writing an essay about Shakespearean whatever. But those standards have nothing to do with the Ontario economy. Now, Ontario's been around for over 100 years, and we've developed very sophisticated standards about which trades, which professions require language examination and which don't. And there are good rules there. So for carpenters, for cement finishers, for bricklayers, it doesn't matter what language you speak in this province. If you want to be a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, that's a different story. So for me, it seems in Ontario, the provincial government under the Constitution, under the law, it's Ontario, not Ottawa, which controls language standards. So I don't understand. It's so simple. If you want to test a worker, we have the language exam centers here doing a great job. We don't need IELTS. We don't need CELPIP. We don't need any outsiders. We got the best people here now testing. And the standards, we already have standards. So just apply Ontario standards and get rid of this nonsense about level 4, level 5, level God knows whatever, X, Y, Z, for trades workers. We already have standards in this province for trades workers. So those are the solutions. Will that get done? I don't know. Logically, I think it's going to happen. And I want to think it's going to happen soon. Now, there's tremendous forces that are going to fight it from happening. Because if IELTS and CELPIP are making $300 more just for the exam than the preparation, I mean, it's a racket. That's all it is, especially for the workers already here in Ontario. So I'm hopeful, maybe, and I think it's going to happen, hopefully within my lifetime. But there it is. So, folks, welcome to Law and Reality. And the lesson here again today is, let's keep our eye on the language ball. One last little comment. I'm really surprised at the number of Europeans and Latin Americans who are in total denial of the language reality just because they speak, because all the young people now speak pretty good English. They can get by. And but they know deep down inside the exam is a problem. And rather than their communities mobilizing on this issue, they're in denial. I think that denial is coming to an end. I think it'll work out okay. For Law and Reality, Richard Borax. Thank you.